People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
He looks like any other 19-year-old college student.
I wouldn't want you doing anything foolish that might tip off who you really are.
The girls think he's cute.
I really gotta go.
But the bad guys think he's a wimp.
What'd you do, college boy? Take some get tough pills?
And that's a mistake.
Superboy!
Now, the superhero of the 90s is here on Earth. Don't mess with Superboy.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. It is the return of Mark Edlitz. He is the author of many, many books. We talked with him about some of his work around James Bond. He is back with a new book called Look Up in the Sky, the Forgotten Superboy Series. It is available on paperback at Finder bookstores everywhere. Had a great time reading this and a great time talking with Mark, and I hope you have a nice time listening to it too. How is your James Bond scholarship going? Because we usually talk about Bond, and I know you've written so extensively and continue to write about him.
Since we last spoke, I had 2 Bond books out, both about the continuation novels. One was a guide to an overview of every continuation novel, spin-off, novelization written since '67. And the other one was interviews with all the living continuation authors.
Did they ever do any adaptations of those books into the movies, or they just...
No, the closest you'll get is a scene in Spectre where Bond is tortured through the ear, which mirrors a similar scene in Colonel Sun. And there's even some dialogue taken from the book. But that's really as close as it gets. And if you're a Bond nerd, which I say with affection, you'll sometimes you go, oh, that there's a scene of Bond on a train in a continuation novel, and now there's a scene of Bond on a train in a movie. They got that from that. But even when it's even more specific than that, I think it's generally just parallel thinking.
Well, yeah, Bond's been taking trains since From Russia with Love. Yeah.
Yeah, exactamundo, yeah.
Yeah, we've been really diving into that with the Rankin on Bond show and just ran out of the books so quickly. It's like, all right, I listened to all of the novels and was comparing those versus the films, but that happens to fall off pretty darn quickly.
Yeah, pretty quickly, yeah. John Gardner wrote more James Bond continuation novels than Ian Fleming did.
Does he capture that tone pretty well?
After the first few books, he's not even trying. I mean, it's interesting because in one of the books, I talk about not just the novels, but like the history of the novels, novels and how they came to be and the purpose and function of them.
I really want to go back and reread The Lost James Bond and just start to figure out what could have been with some of those and then talk with you again about that just because.
Oh, sure. Anytime.
As I've gotten into this stuff, especially with like the Dalton years and then getting into the Brosnan stuff, I'm like, okay, yeah, it seems like they could have gone so many different ways. And even just hearing about, the way that the scripts were just about to record Tomorrow Never Dies and how that was originally one thing and then it moved away from it and then they said no, we're coming back to it. And yeah, just to keep hearing about they wanted to do these stories about Hong Kong and just never really got there. It's like, okay.
Tom Mankiewicz said that they would keep sort of scenes or sequences in their draw in the hopes of repurposing them down the line. And really with a set piece, you can do that. Like I was speaking to John Glenn, the director, and when you come up with a stunt of For Spy Love Me, James Bond jumping off the skiing off the cliff, you've got that stunt, and then it's someone else's job almost to find a reason why James Bond is skiing off the cliff. And you come up with a reason, but it's a MacGuffin. You need to get Bond running away from something to do it, and so that's why you can take a little bit from from here and there and make a different narrative.
Yeah, the amount of skiing scenes are just incredible.
They wanted to do a skiing with Craig, and he said, "No, I can't imagine doing that. That won't look good for me." The Roger Moore green screen of doing this. But when I first watched them, I didn't see green screen. I saw Roger Moore skiing down a mountain.
So how do you go from James Bond to Superboy? Was it the George Lazenby connection?
No, for anyone listening, George Lazenby appears in 2 episodes of Superboy or The Adventures of Superboy as Superboy's father, Jor-El. Let me explain what this book is and what the series is. After the Christopher Reeve films in the late 80s, early 1990s, there was a spin-off series from those Christopher Reeve movies called Superboy, later retitled The Adventures of Superboy. A lot of people are not familiar with this show. The book is called Look Up in the Sky, the Forgotten Superboy Series, and it's forgotten for a couple of reasons, including that it was not available anymore on DVD or streaming for a long, long time after it went off the air. And my goal was I just didn't get it. I just didn't understand why the series existed. I didn't understand what happened to it or under what circumstances it was created and made. And like anybody with a question like that, I decided to write a book about it. I found it really fascinating because today we're very familiar with Marvel and Star Wars taking their movies and turning them into TV series, or turning TV series into movies, or vice versa. And we're used to that connectivity. But in the late 80s, early 90s, that was much less common. It existed, but it was much less common. And what they did is, after those 4 Superman films with Christopher Reeve ran their course, they spun off that take of the character in this Superboy series. And there are 4 seasons, as I said. The first season stars John Newton as Superboy, and Superboy's got a roommate, and there's a Lex Luthor and Lana Lang. 3 of those 4 people are let go after the first season. And in the second season, there's a new Superboy, Gerard Christopher, and then there's a new Lex Luthor, and there's a new roommate. The only person who survived that was Lana Lang. In the third season, they leave their college setting. The premise of it is Superboy in college. And then those are for 2 seasons. And then the third and fourth season, it's almost like the X-Files, where Lana Lang and Clark are interns at the Bureau of Extra Normal Matters, which is sort of like the X-Files before there was X-Files. And Bureau of Extra Normal Matters, it's an acronym for BEM, or Bug-Eyed Monster, which is what comic book writers would say to each other. Here, write in the BEM, or the Bug-Eyed Monster. So each week there was a different Bug-Eyed Monster. It reached 4 seasons, 100 episodes, not syndicated. So I was curious, how does one decide to take a successful TV series and then turn it into a TV show? And it seems like a logical choice. After the movies ran their course, then maybe you try to do something like that on TV. Of course, Superman, if you're of a certain age, you've discovered Superman on TV with the Adventures of George Reeves, or maybe even the animated Justice League series or Super Friends series of the 1970s. But one of the cool things about this, or one of the odd things about this, was that Ilya and Alexander Salkind, who produced the movies, did not originate the idea of the series. Instead, it was this guy named Peter Marino who worked in Chicago. His claim to fame is he is one of 2 DJs who took a recording of Barbra Streisand singing "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" and a separate recording of Neil Diamond singing the same songs, and merged them together. Based on the popularity of that, those two artists came together and recorded them again. The reason that they did it is because a couple of DJs took this mashup. So anyway, he was a Superboy fan, and he said, "I think there should be a Superboy series." And so he got in touch with Ilya Salkind, and then his father Alexander met with them, pitched the idea, and then off to the races. The show was produced by Viacom and was a syndicated series. So in the late 80s, early 90s, there's ABC, NBC, CBS, and you would assume that a big property, a big international property like Superman, Superboy, would be a network show, but that's not what happened. Instead, it was syndicated, paid for by Viacom, and what syndication means is that they had to sell it individually to individual markets across the country. And that's what they wound up doing. And but it was a, sort of a knocking on individual doors all the way through to get market saturation so that it could appear. And over those 4 years, while the show started from the pre-prime time slot from 7 to 8 p.m., it was moved around on the dial over the course of 4 seasons, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes in the morning, and sometimes, 2 or 3 a.m. at night. And one, you say that, well, that hurts the ratings, but also the ratings were hurt. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. The original Superman film and Superman, at least part of Superman 2, were filmed at the same time over like a 17 or 19th month period. These shows were shot in 5 days, sometimes less, which I love how they thought that was a good idea to take this format of, a year and a half to make it a movie and try to deliver those same thrills for 5 days or even less. Sometimes they shot a show in 3 days. It's really incredible stuff.
What was your history with the show? What got you interested in the show and then doing this book?
I can't remember when I originally discovered the series. My first book was called How to Be a Superhero, and that was interviews with actors who have played superheroes over the past 7 decades. And I interviewed John Newton, the season 1 Superboy. And so I remember watching all the episodes then, and that was the first time, 2010 or so, that I had seen all of them. And since that time, I've been toying with the idea of how do I write about the series? Should I write about the series? And the book, it's not a traditional guidebook too. It's not an episode by episode review and plot summary, although that was how I started writing it. And the book didn't want to go in that direction. Although there is obviously information about each episode, it's not dense that way. It's not, there's 2 halves of the book. The first, it's sort of like the structure of I'm thinking about this, of the book is not unlike the structure of your show. I was listening to this podcast. I was listening to either your Airplane 2 or the Brave podcast, and you said something like, and now we're going to go on to the interview section of the podcast. And I thought, oh, it's sort of the same approach where the first half of this book, putting the show and even the character into some sort of context and tracing the history of both the show and the character. And then the second half is interviews. It's interviews with all the lead actors, both Superboys, Lana Lang, the show's writers and producers, Ilya Salkind and David Nutter, the director of so many pilot. He's called the pilot whisperer because he has the greatest number of pilot episodes shot to series order, like in the history of TV. He's done Game of Thrones, he's done X-Files, and one of his first jobs is on the show. And I was a little surprised that he was willing to talk to me about the show, but he has nothing, just given the prestige of his career, but he had nothing but fond memories of it. But one other thing that was interesting to me that I learned while researching this was that, so Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman, and then Siegel almost immediately wanted to do a Superboy series. He pitched it to DC. DC said, no, thank you. Then he pitched it again 2 years later, and they didn't even say, no, thank you. They just they didn't respond. When he went to the war, when he went to serve the country, our country, in war, they decided to do a Superboy book then. So they took his original idea and pitch and approach and then made a Superboy series. And then he found out about it after the fact. And so he sued. One of the funny to me aspects of this is that the judge had to rule on whether Superboy and Superman were the same character or distinct entities. Because on some level, the existence of Superboy negates the mythology of Superman on a basic level of if there was a Superboy in Smallville, they would quickly realize that Clark Kent and Superman were the same. So, and legally they are separate entities, which I found amusing.
Kind of sounds like, is Jesus God's son or is he his own thing? All right. Yeah, I can see the parallel. I mean, we already have the parallels with Superman and the whole Moses story.
Yeah, that's how Michael Uslan, who executive produced all the feature-length Batman movies, created the first comic book course by talking a person at a university who didn't see why comics were even culturally relevant, and he just made that same analogy that you did and talked him through it and was able to get a comic book course going as an aside.
It doesn't sound like it was easy to even track down these episodes to watch.
The show went off the air in 1992, I want to say, after 100 episodes, which is the amount of episodes needed for at that time for syndication. You have 100 episodes of a show, then you strip it. And by stripping, I learned, it's when you play it every day at the same time. So from 3 to 4 p.m., you'd play Superboy. Like, with Batman, that's how it was, but that's not what happened. They did not syndicate it. The whole point of doing the show, which they barely squeaked by on making a profit during its initial run, because it was an expensive show to produce, is to syndicate it, and that's where you make the big money. But as soon as that show was done and they reached 100 episodes, they did not syndicate it. So from 1992 to 2006, the show wasn't really available on TV or home video. And it was only released in 2006 because of Superman Returns, and they were trying to draft on the popularity of it. But that's a long time, 1992 to 2006, for a popular character like Superboy not to be, you have this property, you have all these shows, you have 100 episodes, release the thing, but they didn't for that long.
You already talked about George Lazenby. I seem to remember there being some other really big name guest stars on this as well, or at least big name for me, people like Britt Eklund or Gilbert Gottfried or Michael J. Pollard. I know they're not, common household names, maybe Gilbert, but I seem to remember that was part of their whole thing, right? They had these guest star villains.
Yeah, as you just correctly said, George Lazenby and Britt Eklund played Superboy's mom and pa. Gilbert Gottfried played a toy man type character. They couldn't say toy man, so they called him Knick-Knack. And there was even a comic book spinoff of the show that Gilbert Gottfried co-wrote his comic book. And Michael J. Pollard, Academy Award nominee for Bonnie and Clyde, was Mxyzptlk, and the show had the first live-action Bizarro. And I want to say one more. Oh, Abe Vigoda was in it. Leif Garrett was in it. Yeah, they had some real fun guest stars. Greg Allman, of all people, was in it.
It sounds like a very fun show to watch.
The first season is a little uneven, which may or may not be a charitable way of expressing that. There's a guy who was in charge of it, and it wasn't his fault, but he came from cop shows. And so you could say, well, the Adventures of Superman in the 50s, he was always fighting corruption, and that's true. But this show, the first 12 episodes or so really, didn't feel like comic book Superboy stories. But once they sort of cleared that up and then changed showrunners, they brought in DC comic writers like Mike Carlin and Andy Helfer and Stan Berkowitz became a showrunner on it, and he was a writer on all these would become a writer on all these animated DC superhero stories. Stan Berkowitz was a writer on every DC animated series except for Batman the Animated Series, but all the other ones he was a writer on, and Julia Pistor was a producer on this. Anyway, they were very careful to do comic book type shows in the best possible way. Comic book not meaning camp, but comic book style stories. Superboy loses his power. There's some really fun episodes. There's one where Superboy takes over the world. There's one where Superboy loses his powers. There's one where Superboy loses his memory and starts living with a woman and her son. There's one where Superboy and Lex Luthor are trapped in a cave full of kryptonite. There's one where Superboy has to relive Lex Luthor's childhood memories. So there's a lot of fun stuff, and this book was written in mind that you've never heard of the show or never seen it. So it's not meant to serve only those who have seen it. It's working on the assumption that most people haven't heard of the show or only vaguely remember it.
So was this a passion project for you, or is this something that somebody asked you to write?
As you mentioned, I wrote 4 books on James Bond. And that is James Bond is a passion. I wouldn't say Superboy series was a passion as much more as a puzzle that I wanted to solve. Watching the episode, all 100 episodes several times, I did learn to have tremendous respect for, the writers, the producers, and the actors who did a lot with the material they were given and the conditions under which they had to make it.
How does it compare to Smallville?
Well, it's interesting. There is a lot of discussion on, did Smallville take anything from Superboy series? David Nutter directed the Smallville pilot, and he directed more episodes of Superboy than anyone else. I think like 26. I'm off the top of my head. I think that's accurate. I might be slightly off. And you could say broadly they cover similar territory. There is an episode of Smallville, which is where Superboy and Lex are trapped in a mine together. But I don't think that Smallville drew on this series, but they did draw on the idea of a young Clark Kent growing up in Smallville. And what would that be like? And so as such, there is some overlap. But I just posted something in Reddit in the Smallville discussion. How many of you know of the Adventures of Superboy? And a lot of people did not, Yeah.
The whole idea of them being trapped in a mine. I think back to so many shows where people are trapped in an elevator together, or even the Planet of the Apes TV show where they fall into a former subway station and they're trapped down there. So you always got to trap 2 characters together.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's you come up with an excuse for that. And that's great drama. And that also really was meant to be a bottle episode. So some of the best, and your listeners will know that a bottle episode largely takes place on one set. And the idea is to save money. You can only go on location so many times. And then when the producers look at the budget and go, oh, no, we're losing track of the budget. We've spent more money than we intended to at this point in the season. It's time for a bottle episode and to get everyone caught up. And as you're saying, that's really what the purpose of it is just to keep 2 people together smashing.
Is there a place where people can actually see these episodes?
Since 2006, it has been finding. There are now ways to see it. You can go on Amazon Prime to rent or buy episodes. I think it's on YouTube as well as Apple. When Superman Returns came out, they put out a deluxe season 1 DVD, and that is the weakest of the seasons. So people did buy it, but they're like, eh. So they stopped. And so seasons 2, 3, and 4 for years were not available until Warner Archive does a print on demand feed, which is, they basically burn a DVD for you, but that's not really, so it is available and it's no longer a piece of lost media. But for a while, it was a piece of lost media, which again is striking for a character as worldwide famous as Superman.
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking these days, well, especially because he just won't go away. We're talking about Lois and Clark still. I mean, we have the new movie, we've had the animated films. I mean, it's amazing that there is a Superboy that's out there. We're not talking about him. I wasn't really even familiar with the show until, gosh, I can't remember. There was a book about mostly focusing on the lost, the return of Superman and all the attempts to get that made. I know there was that movie as well, The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened, or whatever that was called. And I read about Superboy in that. But yeah, before that, I had a vague memory of it. And I think it was mostly Michael J. Pollard as Mr. Mxyzptlk. And that was about it.
How many episodes do you think you've seen?
Oh, maybe 2, 3 max.
Yeah.
But reading your book, though, I'm just like, oh, I want to check this out now.
One of the things that's sort of the legacy of the show is the people behind the scenes, and the creators have all gone on to much bigger things, like David Nutter being the biggest example. But is to see this young, talented team just sort of finding their voice and launching their careers through this series, which I think is kind of lovely, I think.
Where's the best place for people to buy the book?
I mean, you could get it everywhere, but Amazon's a great place, and it's always helpful to me and to any writer to give a 5-star review. It's really one of the most generous things that a reader can do, is even if you think it's a 3 or 4-star book, is to give a 5-star review. I mean, you're always saying this to your listeners, is, more than anything else, just give us a review on Apple, so a 5-star review on Amazon, in addition to reading the book, goes a long way.
And you are one of the most busy people I know. What are you working on now next?
I'm working on a book on Orson Welles that I think will fill a hole in Orson Welles literature that is surprisingly lacking, given that Orson Welles, Hitchcock, and Kubrick are probably the most well-covered filmmakers of all time. And so I found this little sliver of history, or maybe big sliver of history that has been unexplored. And I've got a book, and I'm very excited about that project.
Wow. Well, no matter what it is, I'm excited to read it, because I always love the work that you put into this stuff, and I love reading Wells stuff. So yeah, we're going to have to talk again very soon.
That'd be amazing. And let me refer your listeners to your Wells-related podcasts, some of which are hours and hours long. And I also want to say, while we're recording, how generous it is of you to allow me to be on your show and talk about my little book. That's very generous of you, and I really appreciate it.
I dig your work, man. You do great work. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time, Mark. It is always great catching up with you.
Thank you for having me.
The Adventures of Superboy. Exciting stories of Superman when he was a boy, who, even as an infant, demonstrated powers and abilities far beyond the capabilities of Earthlings. Superboy, who as Clark Kent, mild-mannered foster son of Martha and Jonathan Kent, preserves the secret of his true identity and devotes his superpowers to the prevention of crime, the preservation of peace, and the pursuit of truth.